the rise of analytics. How can you implement next-generation analytics to adapt your e-commerce strategy and achieve a competitive advantage? Great, we have them both. Will you please welcome the Global Head of E-commerce Insights and Analytics from Mondelēz, Alister Greenwood. And I'll do the other one. Don't panic, don't panic. And the Chief Customer Officer from CommerceIQ, John Maltman. The stage is yours, gents.
Hi, everybody. Alister and I are going to cross-examine each other, basically, and just explore a few ideas that we think will be interesting to you as we go to 12:30. Don't worry, we'll get you there on time. We won't keep you from your lunch. We will be very disciplined about that. My background, by way of explanation, is I'm the Chief Customer Officer at CommerceIQ. I joined CommerceIQ when they acquired the business I founded about 8 years ago, which was eFundamentals, a digital shelf analytics platform. I founded eFundamentals as an alternative to retirement. I thought I wanted to see if we could build a great company really quickly by being very practical about how we applied analytics to sales and marketing. That was the thesis. Prior to that, my experience was I worked for some great companies in a range of roles, including general management, including Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, and Asda Walmart. I ran a couple of consulting businesses along the way, and eFundamentals was my second startup. So lots of grey hair. And certainly one of the things that you find is that anybody with grey hair working in e-commerce didn't start there. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, Alister.
Well, my hair's getting pretty grey, so I would agree with that. I think actually I should be interviewing you, guess, based on your background. That was pretty incredible. But just a bit about myself. So my career started actually in retail many years ago, just trying to understand the fundamentals of how retail worked, and then worked my way up. Fell into the sort of sales, marketing, analytics space just because retailers have so much data. The depth of that data around each SKU level is incredible, but they don't really know what's going on outside of those walls. So then from there, it took me to the brand world, CPG side, because that's where the big budgets are and the fancy brands and the better nights out and things like that. So that's sort of why I joined them originally. That was with Anheuser-Busch in London, so that made sense. But then, no, from there, I sort of, you get that further understanding of the breadth of data and you know, what is available, what's not, that more view of your competitive set. And then from there, it sort of moved into sort of global agency side and understanding. And agencies obviously have different types of data, so obviously all think theirs is the best. So it doesn't really matter. But where I find myself now back at Mondelēz is trying to bring all this data together, right? And I think it's actually getting, for me, harder and harder in terms of what we're trying to do, but more interesting at the same time. So hopefully we can share that with some of you today.
Thanks very much. So the short story is we've been around the block a few times. So just as you sort of look backwards, what would you colour as the biggest changes you've seen in data and analytics and insights?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the last few years, for me, it's really been around, I think, the fragmentation of data, right? We're seeing our sort of traditional partners have less data coverage now than they used to. There's more exclusive partnerships going on from retailers and data, which makes that, so that coverage is reduced. Further to that, I think there's the rise of smaller channels. Discounters, e-commerce has lifted up, become bigger parts of our business. Now, often that coverage isn't there either, so that's more challenged as well. Then we've got new types of data. We're talking about e-retail media's coming up. We've got digital shelf measurement now we have to try and factor in. And then to add to that, finally, the sort of biggest elephant in the room really is obviously retailers, the rise of commercial powered retailer data. That is just a sort of, for me, this sort of sleeping beast that's growing and it's getting more sophisticated, bigger, but also more expensive.
And as you sort of look forward, what do you think are the big changes that might impact folks as they build their plans for the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult because I think it's just going to get more exclusive and more expensive on the one side. But then I think there is bright spots in that in terms of, I think there's the opportunity for that greater integration of data, you know, and I'd be keen to know from your point of view how you see that from your side of the fence, right, around how can we bring those data together and make those connections more so, right? Because at the moment, it feels like many of us in CPG are dealing with all these different sets of data and trying to, how do we connect them? How do we build platforms and analytic capabilities to do that? You know, Phil talked about it before on stage around, you know, how do they have the right approaches and how do they do that? Test and learn pilots. So it's for us a little bit trying to direct our future, but understand what capabilities are happening from you know, partners like yourselves.
Yeah, I think that the two things that I see happening an awful lot is that the speed of change is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
When we started 8 years ago, we used to think we were in a fast-moving part of the industry, but it's just accelerating all the time. And to the point that it's extremely difficult for human beings to keep up with the decision-making that needs to be made to manage, say, Amazon effectively. And you can see more and more retailers building capability to do more of their decision-making algorithmically. And that the challenge then for CPGs is, how do I keep up with that pace? When we put eFundamentals and CommerceIQ together, it was for a strategic rationale, which was that CommerceIQ had built a deep data tech stack to allow brands to algorithmically trade with Amazon. And we're extending that to Walmart and Target. We had built the digital shelf analytics covering over 600 retailers across the world. And we believed that some of that automation capability and some of that analytical capability could be driven out across a very wide retail universe. What we've found as we make that happen is that the big question that comes up is, where do you start? Organization or with the data and the analytics? And we take the view that the organization will follow, but the first thing to get figured out is, how do you get the right information to the people doing the work?
Yeah.
And the big change I've seen is that it used to be about data, and then it became about insights. But as we look forward, more and more, it's about, just tell me where the work is. Just tell me what I need to do to fix content with retailer A, and get me straight there. And even better, if you can actually do the work and automate that out, that would be even better. So we're trying to build a set of tools that enable any organization to basically move faster and get rid of a lot of the routine work that's involved in the e-commerce business.
Yeah, no, and I think that's amazing, right? The challenge for us is knowing how you're doing it, when you're doing it, and with which partnerships, right? And that's some of the challenge for us. Because for me, I see the future a little bit of talking about those, you know, sort of market challenges that are out there and changes. But not just in terms of bringing the data together and connecting different data sets. That's a sort of two-dimensional view. I think we should all be striving to do that anyways, that first port of call. It's almost like, how do we become three-dimensional? So how do I understand, well, what is the correlation and causality of elements from my digital shelf to my sales and share?
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of vendors downstairs that will be annoyed about me saying this, because I've asked them many times over many years, and I'm still waiting. So I know it's before lunch, I don't want to put anyone off the lunch, but honestly, I think it needs to be moving quicker in this space. And what happens is that we then have to make moves ourselves, our own companies, and then actually what that does is it lessens that partnership, because we're going to just give me your API feed of that data, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Or we'll try and do it ourselves, right? And I think there's the balance there is how do we do that in an aligned way, right? In partnership, that fulfills the vision for us as a company, but also your vision, for your roadmap and delivering for clients as well.
It's interesting because we tend to have two different types of conversations with companies. There are some companies who really need it laid out as a set of events. You'll get this capability then, this capability then. Anybody who can look forward and predict what the capabilities you need in 2 years' time is doing rather well, actually, because the thing is so dynamic. So we can do that. We can give a projection. But in our most engaged relationships, it's much more about agile management. It's much more about having a roadmap, but then reacting to the opportunities as they come, doing experiments, knowing that some experiments will fail. And that's another thing, it was certainly my experience at CPG, was that we didn't have a high tolerance of failure in experiments. We tended to expect them to work.
Yeah.
But actually, if you're going to be pushing at the edge of it and really building up capability that will get you a competitive advantage, you do have to do some experimentation. So it really depends on sort of the nature of the client, whether we have a roadmap which is fairly fixed and therefore it only has the anchor points, if you like, or we have a discussion about what else we're doing, what we're working with, where we see where we're investing our engineering, not knowing exactly how much of it will come to fruition.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think so. And exactly, and that's the balance we're all trying to play, right? As we, as I said, manage our own roadmap of where we want to go, but in partnership. Who are those right partners? How do we get the data from them? What is the right way to bring that in? And then in this changing landscape, right, that, from when we all were back together a year ago, we've seen further acquisitions and partnerships, further, connected partners being called by different companies. So it's a challenge to navigate that. And so I think you need to be clear on your destination, but not worry about how you're going to get there, right? That flexibility is probably going to be important because, things aren't going to happen in necessarily the way or in the order you expect.
And I'd be interested to know, how would you judge a good partner? There's a whole range of partners you will be working with. How do you judge a really good one?
I mean, I think we have lots of great partners, right? And there's many here today. I think, it's really just, are they aligned with what we're doing? So it's really a very sort of aligned approach strategically. Do they understand really what we're trying to do is that, and then sort of help enable that rather than just sort of serving it, right? Can support that in the right way and foresee that and suggest things as well and bring ideas to us and so it's less transactional, more of that strategic partnership element. I think that's one of the key things.
Okay, and then just sort of turning to, you've got a large group of people inside your business that you're serving with the data and the insights. What are the challenges they face in getting these insights and turning them into value that they can action against?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the ever-going challenge as I see it, because we get more and more data. If we build more and more self-serve platforms, right, and have more sophistication, I think that is great. It's a right step. But the counter to that, for me, is that data is taken then away more and more from the experts, right? The people that actually can then take that data, who have done that for a long time, and understand what does that data mean and what are the implications, and then what should we do with it, right? So we move to self-serve. It's just people are taking the data, bringing reports into their presentations, and that's really it. So that's a concern I have, is that data does not equal insights, right? We can have more and more data, but we might be starved for insights. So that's a real challenge I see. But then it's getting, okay, well, how do we structure this? That should be around, do we need then just to go and get a load of data scientists and build these tools? Yeah. I think it's really around, what is the team we need, right? A team of different players with different skill sets to bring together. What are the generalists, the tech specialists, insights, IT folk, but sales and marketing too have all got a role to play to bring that together and make that work, because that's how the organization operates, and this data is just enabling and fulfilling that.
Many people that I talk to in your sort of role, one of the things they're struggling with is attracting and retaining talent. How are you managing that within Mondelēz?
I think it's a difficult thing. I think a lot of companies here have seen a lot of movement in the last 2 years. And I think that's good. That's just a sort of, strategic shift in the market. But there seems to be a lot of opportunity, and I think it's just trying to balance that skill set, right? So we need to go and get the right people with the right skill set, give them the right opportunity, but also be able to balance that in the wider confines of the organization. For us, it's not just that e-commerce focus, understanding how the wider business, understanding of our brands and appreciation, how you drive brand growth, customer loyalty, all that element. But then obviously the nuance of how that shows up on, pure play platforms or, D2C, even last mile is very different. So we need to have that understanding too. And I think it builds that opportunity for people to, to have specialist skills and build general skills as well.
And just thinking at the top of the organization, what can the C-suite do to help with this whole area?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think for us, right, we're very fortunate. We've got, the backing from our CEO and C-suite in doing this, and have invested in digital, in a pretty significant way to enable us to do that. But it's still a real challenge, because I think that lack of understanding, or that vision becomes clear, and they expect these things to happen more quickly. And well, why can't we just bring everything in? And so that generates the tension, the friction that we need to drive the business forward. And so that vision is enabled, right? But at the same time, at that operational level, I understand from how I see it, there's many challenges of alignment, and also getting teams just to be connected, right, within organizations like this. So, sales teams might have their own analytics approaches to things. Insights teams will do, depending on they serve sales or marketing sometimes. IT teams as well say, well, we're IT, we own the data. Okay, so how do we connect all these different tools? And actually, for organizations, that is probably as big a challenge as getting the data and working the data as well.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And one of the things that we find is that very often, it's as well as having great tech, it's as important to establish effective ways of working inside the business. And that very often means making a choice between democratization of data and actually getting the insights that matter to the job role, to the person when they need them. And I think creating that balance is quite difficult. And I think very often one of the barriers to sort of engagement and using technology is just being flooded with too much data and having to take too much time to actually find that hotspot of stuff you need to action today.
Yeah.
So as you, I'm going to turn it to questions from the audience in a second. As you think forward, what advice would you offer to anybody working in your role?
Well, the point you made about the senior stakeholder support is critical. So find someone in the organization who is supportive and passionate, and get them to sort of put the flag in the ground for you, because that's critical, right? You can put it in there, have that interest and do that, then you're off to a start. I think it's just start small, take small steps and progress, right? Celebrate every little win, communicate constantly and effectively, and don't expect to don't try and deal with everything in one go. So I think that's, a project might be set as this and it's going to deliver all these things. That's okay. But in reality, actually, this is just the first phase of an iterative process, right? This is the start of that journey. Because by the time we've got to that point, then things will have changed a little bit, and our needs have, and there might be more data. So think of it that way, and then just really build the right teams and just take time, right, to those small steps. So it doesn't need to be done, in one go, in 1 year. It's in that iterative approach, I think, is critical.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Alister?
Or John.
Or John.
Hi, Maureen Pajot from Manifesto Growth. So I have a question, because I think in all the panels there are two ends of the spectrum. They're kind of, brand building, delivering amazing value proposition, consumer experiences to collect the data and then activate it. And there is the other side, which is of kind of e-commerce and all this decom space, which is about driving sales. And driving revenue for the business. How, or do you have any views, or how is it best to manage and balance between that kind of qualitative space, I would say, versus quantitative, and also in terms of priorities and investment?
Yeah, I think firstly on the DTC side, you've got a lot more richness of data, right? So probably I would say my preference, and this is not right, but my preference would be to deal with that separately, right? Because you've got all that data, the visibility, all those transactions. If you own that ecosystem, then keep that and work that and keep that separate. When you're trying to build across all the channels, right, omni-channel pure play, now we've got this emergence for last milers. The data's really differentiated and spotty, and how can we bring it together, but it's not all consistent. So we need to sort of manage that approach, but at the same time, the brand is the overlay. The sales brand piece is the overlay, absolutely. So the strength of your brands is that this data and analytics is just enabling that, enabling our understanding and to drive those forward. So I think it's just the engine behind that.
My build on that would be, first of all, if you're working in e-commerce and you're not worried about brand strength, then you're missing something. Because brand strength is very, very important to making sure you're getting strong returns from your media investments, for example. So they need to be connected, and they can't become disconnected, particularly in a world where retailers are finding more and more ways to sell you media. So that becomes an important competitive advantage. The other thing I would just throw out there is make sure you're not using the metrics of the past to look forward. 2 years ago, anybody you talked to in terms of e-commerce, it was number one priority was growth, number two priority was growth, number three priority was growth. That's not the case anymore. Number one priority is profitable growth. And then brand strength is extremely important, number 2 or 3. Think about the way you measure media. If you're measuring RoAS, for example, as your key measure for media effectiveness, then what you're actually measuring is the value of a lot of sales you would have got anyway. So you should be thinking about incremental RoAS and putting your money where you're going to drive high incremental RoAS rather than necessarily just feeding a volume you would have already got. So I think that it's really, really important that as working in this sector, we're always thoughtful about what are the true measures we should be using going forward. And I think they're changing. I don't think they're fully defined yet. But I think that's an important work for us to do. So I did promise you to get you to 12:30. It is exactly 12:30. So enjoy your lunch and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Alister.